A girl went out to the yard of her house to meet her father from the store and seemingly vanished into thin air. Her parents contacted the police, and from the very first day, this case began to resemble the plot of a detective series rather than a real incident, as such a combination of incredible clues and events is extremely rare. Jessica Nott was born on June 22, 1986, in a suburb of Orlando, Florida. The girl had an older brother and a younger sister, as well as loving parents. Her father worked as a builder and often went to other states for several days, so the children were frequently left alone with their mother. Jessica was a lively and active child. She spent a lot of time playing outside with friends, playing with her brother and sister, and she also loved animals. On April 5, 1996, when she was 9, Jessica's family decided to visit her father's parents for Easter. The man went to the store to buy everything needed for the holiday, and the girl's mother was packing for the upcoming trip. Jessica came back from school with other children and soon asked her mom if she could go to the yard. She wanted to wait there for her father, who was supposed to return from the store with groceries soon. The woman let her go, telling her not to leave the yard. The residential complex was located away from the main road and surrounded by trees on all sides, so the woman was not particularly worried that something might happen to her daughter. Moreover, Jessica and the other children always played there without adult supervision. Several hours later, after 6 in the evening, her father returned home and asked his wife where Jessica was. She was surprised because the girl was supposed to be in the yard waiting for her father. However, the man said she was not there. They went out to the yard, after which they began to search the entire territory of the complex, but they could not find Jessica. After that, the parents decided to visit the neighbors, hoping that someone might have seen their daughter. One of them said that he saw the girl in the yard, sitting on a bench and reading a book, but this did not help the anxious parents find her. Considering that it was already getting dark outside and the location of their daughter remained unknown, they decided to contact the police. Officers arrived at the location and began the search, as well as interviewed all the neighbors. However, Jessica could not be found anywhere in the complex, and the police gradually expanded the search area to the neighboring streets. This continued for several hours until a call came into the police station. There was a lot of background noise on the other end, making it difficult for the operator to understand the speech. The caller was a man who said that the missing girl could be found near the water tower, a few kilometers from her home. The police immediately went to the location, where a heartbreaking sight awaited them. Next to the building lay the body of a girl, protruding from a black garbage bag. It was only a few meters from the road, but it was impossible to notice from the side. The water tower was located under a bridge, from which only its roof was visible. Several magazines and a child's mirror lay next to the body. The police quickly established that the deceased was Jessica Nott and handed her body over to medical examiners. While they were examining it, investigators focused on tracing the 911 call. It was obvious that it had been made by the murderer, and the police hoped to catch him quickly. However, there was a problem. It turned out that the call had been made from a payphone at a gas station, located less than a kilometer from where the body was found. Naturally, by the time the officers arrived at the location, the criminal was no longer there. Detectives tried to find fingerprints on the phone, but they did not have high hopes. Firstly, it was a public payphone that had been actively used by many people in those years, meaning it could have dozens of different fingerprints. Secondly, investigators quickly realized that the criminal had likely wiped the handset after the call. Experts concluded that the girl was killed elsewhere, after which her body was transported to the water tower. This was indicated by the tracks on the ground in front of the building. Apparently, the murderer took the body out of the car in a trash bag and dragged it across the ground. Jessica was fully dressed, except for one shoe. The police did not find it either in the bag or anywhere near the area. The only clue found at the crime scene was a tire track on the ground. The police could not be sure it was left by the murderer's car, but they still photographed it and made a cast. Medical examiners concluded that the victim had died of suffocation. Based on the marks on her face and neck, the murderer likely strangled her with his hands. In addition, a hamburger was found in her stomach, which the girl had eaten less than an hour before her death. Her mother stated that she had not given her daughter anything like that on that day, leading the police to the most likely conclusion that the fast food had been provided by the murderer. Experts also found no signs of sexual violence, leaving the criminal's motive completely unclear. As a result, they began to look at the girl's parents as suspects. Both of them lacked a solid alibi at the time of the girl's disappearance. The mother said she was in the apartment packing. The father was shopping. However, in theory, they had the opportunity to commit the crime. The police tried to understand how the murderer managed to take Jessica from the yard of her complex without any of the neighbors noticing and without the girl attempting to scream. They concluded that the criminal most likely knew the victim well. This theory was supported by another fact. Experts tried to clean up the recording of the criminal's phone call from the background noise that made it difficult to discern his voice, but so far, they had been unsuccessful. However, it was audible that the killer spoke with sadness and regret in his voice, as if he genuinely repented his actions. The very fact that he risked calling 911 also said a lot. The criminal could have taken such a step for two reasons. Either he enjoyed playing with the police and influencing the situation, or he truly regretted his actions and wanted to somehow mitigate this feeling. Given that the caller spoke with obvious sadness in his voice, investigators were leaning towards the second option. The police examined Jessica's father's car, and there they found something interesting. In the trunk, there was a roll of black garbage bags, similar to the one in which the victim's body was found. However, the expert who studied the bag from the crime scene quickly established that it differed from those found in the girl's father's car and clearly belonged to another roll. Consequently, the man was temporarily no longer considered a suspect, and the focus shifted to searching for others. Forensic scientists examined the victim's clothing and body for potential clues and found several possible leads. Firstly, there was a large amount of dog hair. Considering Jessica did not have a dog, this suggested the animal belonged to the killer. Human hair belonging to an unknown white male was also found on her body. However, it would take several days to extract a DNA profile. Moreover, two types of foreign fibers were discovered on the girl's clothing. After examining their structure, experts concluded that one of them likely came from the upholstery of car seats and the other from a carpet. This only confirmed the theory that the victim was killed elsewhere and then brought to the water tower by car. Regarding the dog hair, experts attempted to determine its breed. They used a special FBI database that contained microscopic photographs of hair from most dog breeds. This database was created because dog hair often played a role in criminal cases, and sometimes these clues could lead to solving the case. The experts began to compare the hair with samples from the database, matching them and eliminating unsuitable options. Eventually, they concluded that the hairs on the victim's clothing belonged to a Sharpie. It appeared that the murderer had such a dog, and the hair got on Jessica's clothing either in the criminal's car or at his home. According to the preliminary version of the investigators, the killer might have lured the girl into his car under some pretext, taken her to McDonald's to buy her a hamburger, and then brought her to his home, where he committed the murder. Concurrently, experts were trying to improve the recording of the phone call, but this proved to be a difficult task. They then decided to try a different approach. The detectives sought help from NASA, which had its own advanced tools for cleaning up audio recordings of astronauts' conversations. NASA agreed to help and provided the police with a higher quality audio track. However, the experts still needed to obtain a voice sample of the suspect for comparison with the call recording. In such a case, they would be able to establish a match. Based on the detectives' assumption that the killer must have known Jessica, they decided to play the recording to her mother, hoping that the woman would recognize the person. After listening to it the first time, the woman realized that the voice was indeed familiar to her, but she could not remember to whom it belonged. However, upon a second listening, it dawned on her. She recognized that the voice belonged to their neighbor, who lived in the same complex. The mother could not recall his name but told detectives that this man always walked his dog, a brown Shar-Pei, in the yard. The police immediately found out that this person was 35-year-old James Crow. When investigators had interviewed all the residents of the complex, the man told them that he had briefly talked to the girl in the yard while walking his dog and then left. Detectives checked his background and found that Crow had no criminal history. He lived with his wife, a nurse. The man, a former truck driver, was temporarily unemployed and spent most of his free time walking the streets with his dog, a Shar-Pei named Pumpkin. The police understood that just the similarity of the voice and the ownership of a dog of that breed would not be enough for an arrest. They obtained a warrant to search his car, where they found two interesting clues. First, under the front passenger seat, there was a Happy Meal bag. Considering that a McDonald's hamburger was found in Jessica's stomach and James had no children, this seemed highly suspicious. Second, experts noted that the car had brand new tires, as if they had hardly been used. The police found out that Crow had replaced them on the day of Jessica's murder, although his previous tires were not so old and could have lasted a few more years. Moreover, Crow said he left the old tires at the auto service. Again, this was highly strange, and the police obtained the address of the service from him. By the time they got there, only one tire from James's car was left. They compared its pattern with the one found near the body's discovery site, but detectives faced an unexpected outcome. They did not match. However, they were never 100% sure that the track on the ground was left by the killer's vehicle and not by some other car. For instance, maintenance staff regularly visited the building, and the imprint could very well belong to their vehicle. After that, the police examined James's apartment, where they found a new lead. There was a box with several rolls of garbage bags of the same size and color as the one on the victim's body. Of course, this could not even be called circumstantial evidence. Therefore, detectives had to think if there was any way to establish that the bags were taken from the same roll. At first glance, this task seemed impossible. The bags themselves had no markings or distinctive features, and there were hundreds of manufacturers of such products. However, soon even the detectives were surprised at the ingenuity that could be shown in such a complex task. They sought help from Neil Roberts, a person responsible for quality control at the manufacturing company of the bags, a box of which was found in the suspect's apartment. First, he identified the specific factory where the bags from the suspect's apartment were made. The paper box containing the rolls had a special code indicating that the product was made at a facility in Virginia. Next, the expert explained that the bags contain a small amount of iron or titanium, depending on their color. Since the factory produces products of different colors, materials at the factory are constantly replaced, and the ratio of plastic to iron or titanium changes almost daily, as such tiny amounts of additives cannot be measured with 100% accuracy. In other words, experts could take bags from the suspect's apartment and from the body's discovery site, measure the presence of the required additives in the plastic using a high-intensity X-ray beam, and obtain a very precise number of impurities. After conducting such an analysis, they found that the ratio of impurities to plastic in both bags was absolutely identical, meaning they were produced on the same day and must belong to the same batch. But that's not all. During the production of garbage bags, a small amount of microscopic debris gets into the machines, which is perfectly acceptable by manufacturing standards. However, this results in small stripes appearing on the fabric from which the bags will later be cut, visible to the naked eye. They are present on every bag in large quantities, and together they form a unique pattern for each fabric. Particles of debris on the conveyor belt constantly move, fall off, and get replaced by new ones, so the pattern of similar stripes only persists for several meters of fabric, indicating that two different bags were made not just within the same batch, but within hours of each other. Experts compared the bags from the suspect's apartment and the crime scene, and the lines matched with astonishing accuracy. But even that wasn't all. The expert also explained that after the bags are manufactured, they are rolled up by a machine which often does it unevenly. If you don't look closely, these deviations are almost unnoticeable and the rolls seem even. However, a closer look at the edges of the bags reveals tiny folds and creases that form a pattern as unique as the stripes. Ultimately, experts compared the bags again and established that the bags from James's apartment matched the bag from the crime scene. With all the information combined, they concluded that the bag used by the killer was not just produced by the same company, but manufactured within a range of at most 17 boxes from each other. This meant that there was a high probability that the criminal had taken the bag from the roll in James's apartment. In addition, forensic scientists compared the two types of fibers found on Jessica's clothing with the carpet from the suspect's apartment and the upholstery of his car seats, and both samples matched. Finally, an audio expert compared the 911 call recording with a sample of James's voice and concluded that the voice belonged to the same person. Despite the incredible work by the experts, detectives faced a problem. All this evidence was circumstantial. Nonetheless, they were confident in James' involvement and decided to arrest him. The man was taken into custody, and the prosecution stated that they would seek the death penalty. Given that Crow continued to deny his guilt, the case was taken to court. According to the investigators' version, the events unfolded as follows. James spent a lot of time outside with his dog, and all the local children knew him well because they never missed an opportunity to play with Pumpkin, while the man talked to the kids. As a result, they trusted him, and Jessica was no exception. According to the police on that day, James noticed her alone on a bench while walking his dog and struck up a conversation with the girl. He offered to drive her to McDonald's, promising to buy her hamburgers. Jessica agreed. After that, he likely drove her back to the complex and invited her into his apartment. Possibly, as a pretext, he used the opportunity to play with Pumpkin. His wife was at work, and the presence of fibers from the carpet in his living room indicated that the girl was there on the day of her death. Next, according to the investigators, James might have attempted to assault the girl, but something went wrong. According to the medical examiner's report, the perpetrator not only strangled the victim with his bare hands, but also pressed his palm against her face. Perhaps Jessica tried to scream, and he panicked and pounced on her. After the girl died, he placed her in a garbage bag to carry the body to his car without arousing the neighbors' suspicions. He then drove a few kilometers away and left the body near the water tower, made a call to 911 from a nearby gas station, and returned home. At the preliminary hearings, James's lawyers tried to dispute all the existing evidence, claiming it was not conclusive proof of their client's guilt. Although these circumstantial pieces of evidence were accepted by the judge, the lawyers were correct. In death penalty cases, the evidence requirements are much higher, and in James's case, there was a very significant chance of not achieving this verdict. Eventually, they decided to offer the suspect a deal, under which he would plead guilty to second-degree murder and receive 40 years in prison, without the possibility of parole instead of the death penalty. In the summer of 1998, 2 years after the murder, James agreed to the deal. Under its terms, he was not required to disclose any details of the crime. However, the man stated that he decided to agree, in part, to spare the girl's family the necessity of going through a lengthy trial. According to the prosecution, the criminal truly showed remorse. This was also indicated by his 911 call, the purpose of which remained unclear. The only logical explanation in this situation was that James sincerely wanted to alleviate his guilt for such a monstrous crime. Jessica's parents were not thrilled with this deal, as they had hoped for the death sentence. They'd also wanted the killer to give a confession, but James continued to remain silent. Nevertheless, he did not live to the end of his sentence. The man died in November 2011 due to health problems at the age of 49, taking the details of the crime and his motives to the grave. It's worth noting the truly unique work of the experts and detectives in Jessica's case. The amount of information they were able to obtain from analyzing ordinary garbage bags surprised even the judge, who had never encountered anything like this throughout his career. Despite this, he acknowledged that all these findings put together would indeed have significant weight if the case had gone to trial.